compassion through the labyrinth. And this is something that emerged um, in reflecting on our last retreat, the people that we had met and the experiences we had. It really came through as this idea of creative compassion, which I think the world really needs right now. We need creativity and we need compassion. So that's what we'll be exploring together. And Sweden is surprising to find out is the has more ancient and historical examples than any country in the world. You know, there's over 400 walkable labyrinths that are at least 100 years old or more. Um, and, you know, unlike maybe the United States or Australia, who have been through kind of one labyrinth, revival, Sweden has actually been through five different periods of creation and use. And they're not distinct. They do overlap, and they are not really time periods, perhaps, but um, early labyrinths in Sweden, maybe dating back 2,000 years or more, reflected the cycles of life and the seasons, and especially were used around midsummer. And then fishermen would walk the labyrinth before going out to sea, for good luck and good catch. And then they would walk the labyrinths again when they returned back from sea as a prayer of gratitude. And then in the medieval churches, we find graffiti and frescoes of labyrinths. And there's three churches in Gotland where we've discovered, not we, but uh, researchers and historians have discovered um, graffiti and frescoes of the classical labyrinth. And then there was a period where teachers and museums included labyrinths as historical exercises to teach students how to draw the seed pattern and to include the labyrinth in museums, both in on Gotland and then in Stockholm. And then the most recent use of the labyrinth is in schoolyards or playgrounds, and that's where you see a lot of the modern contemporary labyrinths being created as almost a return back to the beginning, because in Midsummer the labyrinths were also used as a kind of a youthful ritual. So. And here's a map. So the island of Gotland, I'd never even heard of it when Jeff Sayward told me about it. I asked Jeff, I said, Jeff, I want to go back to Sweden, to explore my roots. And, is there a place you recommend to go see labyrinths? And he was like, oh yeah, Gotland is the place. So here it is in the center of the Baltic Sea. And Valerie, do you want to talk a little bit about the importance of Gotland in terms of its location and
Mhm. So if you see Gotland, it's there in the Baltic Sea, but it's also the bridge between Western Europe and Eastern Europe. It was also the capital, Visby was the capital of the Hanseatic League in the 1200s. And so it was this huge port of trade and going from, again, Eastern Europe to Western Europe. And so it was this hub of activity and really diversity. You had people from all over living in Visby until about 1362, when then the trade routes got changed to Copenhagen, Denmark. And so Visby is the one of the most complete medieval cities on the planet. It is a walled city. There are currently still 3,000 inhabitants that live in the city of Visby. There it is. And it's in my background too. And so with that, we have lots inside the walls, we have lots of cathedral ruins. We have really, I would say about 1,500 years or more of history that you can see. The island in total is 9,800 years old, and you can see everything from the Neolithic, Mesolithic, all the way up to modern times. So we are a rich treasure trove of culture because of the trade that was happening on the island and how all those cultures intersected. So that's
Great. Yeah, and I just go back to this image here, which shows the fishing village. So
I'll
this is
show.
a traditional small fishing village with these little fishing huts and a little harbor there you can see. And then this is a 15 circuit classical labyrinth that was built by a lighthouse keeper. So almost all of the labyrinths on the island are classical labyrinths, and they can be 7, 11, or 15 circuits. So. And this is the most famous labyrinth, not only on the island, but also in Sweden. It's the Visby Trojaborg, which is just about a 10-minute walk or a 5-minute bike ride north of the town. And it's one of the older labyrinths that's just surrounded by folklore and stories. And um, one of my favorite labyrinths in the world. In fact, this is the labyrinth that Valarie was building in her yard after the workshop, and this is the first canvas labyrinth that I ever created was this pattern because I just loved this. And I think it's really the great grandmother of the Chart labyrinth. So if we think of Chart as like the grandmother of all labyrinths, then this is actually the great grandmother here.
Yeah. That labyrinth's 1,000 years old. And when you walk it, the grooves are really deep. They're
Yeah.
really deep. Yeah.
And do you want to share a little bit about Midsummer and the life cycles that we're gonna kind of be
Yes.
honoring?
Yeah, so Midsummer is the highlight of the year. It is the most popular holiday of the year. It's where the sun stands still and it's light around 20. We're farther south from the North Pole, so we have about 22, 23 hours of daylight standing for 4 days, if not more, usually four, it depends. Um, but we gather together and we build the Maistong. That's that pole you see with all the greenery. And then we dance and sing and eat and be merry. Everybody, we make flower wreaths for our hair. And that's one of the things we do the morning of Midsummer. I'll teach you the songs and dances. And this isn't like Dancing with the Stars. There's no judges. Everybody's being goofy and funny, like to see adults do what we do and the children do the same thing. It's very intergenerational. And the whole premise is to celebrate, life and abundance, and flowers are everywhere, and people are happy and singing. And you will really have this deep experience of the shortest day of the year. And it's one of the highlights of our retreat is Midsummer, and I love it so much.
Yeah, and being in Sweden, it's really an incredible experience of symbolism and ritual. So, we're focused on the labyrinth as a symbol and as a tool for ritual, but also you see this as a sun cross here, a circle cross that's in the ground made of stone that's in one of the outdoor museums. And then, this ritual of dancing around the maypole, so not only will we be learning and experiencing the labyrinth as a symbol, but we'll also be experiencing other symbols and rituals, that are closely related to it. In some ways, these symbols and rituals were the things that evolved into the labyrinth. And as we go around the island here, again, you can see the wall around the medieval capital of Visby. And then also these boat graves, Viking ship graves, and picture stones, and then old windmills. And so everywhere you look, you just scratch the surface, and you are stepping into the stories and the echoes of the past. And this is probably the other oldest labyrinth on the island in Fruel, and again, also tied to um, the seasonal cycles and the celebration of spring and fertility, but also Valarie was exploring its connection to death rituals and just, honoring all periods of life. So. It's really incredible because it's inside a churchyard. And, from a Western perspective, or like in the United States, you would imagine that the church built the labyrinth. But what's amazing is that in Sweden, churches don't really build labyrinths in their courtyards. That wasn't one of the five phases of labyrinth use in Sweden. So actually, it's more that this was an ancient sacred site, and the labyrinths were probably there, and the church was built next to them because it was an existing sacred site. And so, it's thought that this labyrinth could very well be older than the church.
Yeah, we in 2018 they did an archaeological excavation. It's a whole compound with an ancient port, and it was the largest port on Gotland. And this labyrinth they are dating about 3,800 years old. And the reconstruction that we now see happened in 1977. So
Yeah.
it's gone through many generations and millennia of usage, and you feel that when you're there. And it has its own water source, which is very unusual.
Yeah. So you can actually pump water out of the
Yeah,
labyrinth. Talk about labyrinth holy water. Well, there it is.
yeah.
So. And so then another phase of labyrinth use was this the fishermen and labyrinths by the sea. And there's this folklore that, you could walk very slowly to the center of the labyrinth and then run quickly straight out. And the trolls who had followed you into the labyrinth then would get stuck inside and, couldn't chase you because they would get trapped inside the labyrinth. And so that's one of the kind of more uh, fun rituals that we'll be experiencing in this kind of this is a contemporary labyrinth, but it's right by the water and really kind of represents also the winds. There's another idea that the labyrinths might trap the bad winds. Val, you want to share about the churches there on the island a little bit?
Yes. So inside the city of Visby, we have 21 cathedral ruins. But then on the island itself, we have about 95 Gothic churches that were built in the same time period as the great cathedrals in Visby. And so many are restored, most are restored, they're in use. And like everywhere, church usage is going down. So they group five churches together and one pastor does a circuit. So each Sunday is a service in a different church. Each church is unique to itself. They have beautiful artifacts and wall paintings, oftentimes original dating back from the 1200s, 1100s, 1300s. And so each church is this beautiful little gem, and you have a unique experience in every church you go to. I have not been to all of them yet. And I've been going to this island for, decades,
Yeah, and
decades.
what's exciting is that the capital of Visby is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, but the 94 Gothic churches around the island have now been designated their own
Mhm.
UNESCO heritage status. So all of the churches as well are now recognized preserved wonder. And then this are some photographs of the graffiti. They're a little hard to see in images. They're better to see in real life. But you see, a 11 circuit labyrinth, a 5 circuit labyrinth. You see mandalas, sacred geometry, and fishing boats and things carved into the walls. So really fascinating to see these in almost prayers. John Kraft, who's a researcher um, of Swedish history, labyrinth history, says that a lot of these, scratched into the walls were almost like little prayers, because they weren't painted over. They weren't like graffiti in the sense of like, like somebody scratching graffiti in a church today. No, these are like little written offerings, and many include runic words as well. How about Bunga, Valerie? Do you want to?
Yeah. Bunga is up in the north. We'll be visiting that our first day on the road. And this labyrinth was created by the schoolmaster. And they have old school is right across the street from there. And this is what we call a four-season labyrinth. So you have big stones going in all directions, representing the four directions and the four seasons. Bunga also is a hub of folk history. So, as things were modernizing, they would take ancient buildings, farming buildings especially, from all over Gotland, from the 15th century, 16th century, 17th century, all the way up into the 20th century. And they've created this beautiful outdoor museum so you can really see what life was like on the island. And so we'll be visiting that museum. And then they have an amazing cafe that's owned by my friend Yvette, and we usually eat lunch there. And you can sit in buildings from the 1600s and have lunch or eat lunch out in the garden. So Bunga is a highlight of our retreat and one of the first places we go on our first day on the road.
Yeah, and even though this is a museum labyrinth, it was built, over 100 years ago. So it's still, relative to American labyrinths, much older than any labyrinth you would find in the United States. Although there it's an example in a museum. And here are some labyrinths that have been created in modern times. So one at Labyrinth, which is an incredible farm by a woman, and she's also an artist. And she actually created this labyrinth on her farm to connect it with the history of the past. And because her farm was on an ancient site of farming, and also her children were practicing for acrobats and circus, and so one of them used to unicycle through the labyrinth as a practice training ground. And then this other spiral labyrinth is in a playground, and so when I brought my daughter um, 2 years ago, she really enjoyed, it was fun to have a stone labyrinth there as part of the play area. And here again is the island, a little more detailed map. Now you can see Visby there is the capital, and it's on the north west. And then you see these roads leading out, one to the northeast, one to the southeast, and one to the south. And so our 3 day, we'll have 3 day bus tour. So one day we'll go to the north, once to the east, and once to the south. And then here you can see a map of the labyrinths around the island and how perhaps different labyrinths inspired other labyrinths. And so you see from top to bottom, the island is just full of labyrinths in almost every corner. Um,
And
and
some we
even,
know are there. Some we know are there. Like Lars and I went looking for one last summer and we couldn't find it, but we're like going through ancient records going, and they said it's like 50 steps.
oh
But like
yeah.
what? How big were their feet? Like it was funny. So even though we know there's a lot of labyrinths there, we haven't found all of them yet. We're still looking.
hmm And it's so funny the similarities to Chartres, France, because the main cathedral is St. Mary's Cathedral, just like the Chartres Cathedral dedicated to Mary. And then it was consecrated in 1225, which is almost, you know, exactly when the Chartres Cathedral was completed. And this cathedral also has a labyrinth, although it's a modern day labyrinth. It was created in 1985. But in front of the cathedral is a square labyrinth that's inlaid in pavers. So pretty interesting that the similarities. Although the labyrinth is outdoors, so another big difference if you've been to Chartres, uh, that that's an indoor labyrinth experience, whereas the Gotland experience is very much connecting to the outdoors and to the environment. And this is even our conference room. So instead of an indoor conference room, we have an open air conference room, which is really a medieval ruin that is connected to the hotel. So just steps outside of your comfortable room and bed is a doorway that leads you into this ruin where we gather for our morning circles, and birds are flying through and you can feel the sun. And this is where we'll have our opening circle, and we'll meet every morning to start our days. And then also on the left, you can see a mandala that Valarie drew. So one of the processing artistic exercises we'll have in the evening for reflection and is going to be creating our own mandalas. And they can be either simple or, complex. They can be um, straightforward or they can be very ornate. So it's really up to you how you create your own mandala, but I think it will be fun to create our own geometric symbols and use them as a way to reflect on our time on the island. And then day two is our first full day together. So this would be on Monday. We'll have a walking tour of the city, and we'll begin to really think about compassion. And do you want to share a little bit about, the compassion that we see in Visby there, Valerie?
Yeah. So when you're on an island, you're in a closed container. So the idea of sustainability is not new on Gotland, and you can see throughout the centuries and millennia that compassion and care for where we live has always been a primary focus. And so some of the ways that we see that is in our farming techniques, that we do not use pesticide, that we do community farming, that um, we really are taking care of the land and the water sources that, sustain us. As we visit different artisans, you'll see how they're reusing plastics and making new items for people to use. Or we'll go to a Bronze Age farm, but it has the one of the best organic restaurants in all of Europe on it. And then how we have a whole wool industry that's indigenous to the island. Also, throughout the centuries, the different cloistered women's communities were the ones that gave health care. And they used, herbs that were on site. They used music. They used prayer. So throughout every generation, which we've had many now on Gotland, you can see how people are bringing compassion and care into what they create. And that can even be your everyday life, how we recycle, how we eat organic foods, how the food is grown on the island and using very little fossil fuel to bring things in. So everything has a contemplative nature to it, not religious, but contemplative, and then bringing compassion to ourselves as we create, and then that spreads and flutters out to each other. So Gotland is a great place to experience what it means to be a compassionate creative.
Yeah, and one of the artists we met last year is a woman in the north who recycles garbage from the island into pottery or different containers or things like these decorative vases. And so she actually takes plastic from the island or found on the seashore and she grinds it up into these flakes, which then she forms into jewelry. So we're going to visit her studio and learn about her practice. And then we're going to visit the museum, that Bunga Museum that Valerie discussed earlier. And it's really incredible to see, these picture stones. Um, I love this. This is like just the open air classroom again. You can see. And then on Wednesday, we're going to head to the south, and this is the artist I was discussing in my story earlier about seeing a runestone on the side of the road and discovering this artist that now is creating mosaic modern day rune stones, reflecting on his own life journey. And so he has passed away, but I was able to buy his book, and we were able to meet his nephew and visit his studio. And we're hoping to do that again with you this year because he not only created his own artwork, but he also was the lead conservator in restoring many of the murals in the Gothic churches. So he helped to uncover and repaint many of those murals in a real act of compassion and preservation. And then he also created his own art to move the culture and the history forward.
And then he also created the fishing museum. So that way of life that is no more is now preserved in this amazing fishing museum right next door to his studio. So he
Yeah,
really was one of these compassionate creatives who wanted to preserve our Gotland history for those of us who follow him.
yeah.
Not follow him directly, but meaning just come after him.
Following his footsteps, yeah.
Yeah,
And that's what
exactly.
we're doing is we're following in footsteps, which is, so beautiful. This is that winding labyrinth on the shore. And then there's also an incredible ceramic studio that we're going to visit as well. And so, there's just art and culture around every corner. And then Friday will be the Midsummer celebration. So we'll make our flower crowns. There's a procession with music through town, and then there's the dancing around the maypole, and just a real spirit of celebration of vibrancy and life. And then our last day, we'll have a walk of the 11th Circuit Visby Trelleborg, and we'll be visiting the museum, which is a real incredible. This is the indoor museum in Visby that has, incredible statues that are too delicate to be held in the original churches. So these are some of the preserved statues of Mary and other saints. And then just incredible artifacts and special exhibits about the history, including an incredible collection of runestones. So the hotel. So what's funny about this hotel is that, Valarie sent out a couple emails to different hotels, and I think only two wrote her back. And then one of them was the Hotel St. Clemens, where they were really enthusiastic and welcoming to us as a group. But the owner, he was interested in this idea of the labyrinth because he had been practicing meditation, but wasn't really sure, how people use labyrinths. But it turns out it was his great grandfather that created the labyrinth at the lighthouse in the North Island of Visby, I mean of Gotland, and then his grandfather built the other island lighthouse labyrinth. So he actually comes from a labyrinth heritage, and now we've stayed at his hotel for 2 years, and we'll be returning again. And it's really participants say that it's like staying, with a family, that they care for you in such a warm
Yeah.
and welcoming way, and it's the number one rated hotel in all of TripAdvisor. So, it gets more five-star reviews than any other hotel.
They're so accommodating. And then the breakfast is to die for. They have amazing breakfast every single day. It's just fabulous.
And this is just, you just see the history walking around the town. So you'll have some downtime. The breakfasts are included in your hotel, but then the lunches are on your own or with the group, but you'll pay for your own lunch. So lunches and dinners are not included, but it's just a time to go out, either alone or with your partner or with a new friend or a small group and have some quieter time to reflect and just, some people like big meals, some people like small meals, some people like fancy restaurants, some people like just getting things from the corner market. So this way it really gives you an opportunity to take care of your own desires and needs in terms of food.
And it's our way of keeping the cost of the retreat down. If this had been all inclusive, it would, Scandinavia, Sweden in general can be expensive, but there are a lot of different layers of expense when it comes to food. And so we didn't do it all inclusive for that reason. We do have a group meal together that's usually on the last day at the museum at lunch. And, they make amazing food in that restaurant. So we look forward to doing that together. So breakfast every day is included, and then it's the other two meals on your own as you see fit.
Does breakfast start at 3:30 a.m. when it gets light?
6. It
I could
starts at
squeeze, I could
6.
like get an early breakfast and then I'm like a hobbit. I could eat like all day. So can I go back
Swede,
and
Swedes eat all day.
put
We
on
have
a different
something
hat?
called fika. So we have a morning fika and an afternoon fika. Fika is coffee time, and you have
Mm.
coffee with usually cinnamon rolls or something sweet.
Yeah, here.
So we eat incessantly over there. You don't get time to get hungry.
Yeah. And then the two main ways to get onto the island are either a ferry or a local airplane. So SAS is